Good day, everyone. Thank you again for tuning into my channel. As you can see, I'll be discussing about this particular title, and the cost it says the cost of following Christ. Now, I know that many of us have actually heard many wonderful and encouraging messages biblically when it comes to really living our lives for Christ. We may have, or you may have received blessings here and there, and some of us even use scriptures depending on their life circumstances, and they relate biblical verses based on what they go through in life, whether it be anxieties, depressions, types of trials and tribulations. In a way, they're not wrong, but we should also put into consideration that following Christ can cost us many valuable things in our lives. That includes our relationships, our ambitions and goals and things like that. And these things can also get in the way of our path to really following Christ. Right now, He's extending an invitation to us that leads to this particular reckless abandon. It's in a spiritual sense anyway, and shifting our focus to the true priority in our lives, and that is being that true disciple of Jesus Christ. If we look at Luke 14 verse 16 to 24, it says, "But he said to him, a man once gave a great banquet and invited many. And at the time for the banquet he sent his servant to say to those who had been invited, 'Come, for everything is now ready.' But they all began to make excuses. The first said to him, 'I have bought a field, and I must go out and see it. Please have me excused.' And another said, 'I have bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I go to examine them. Please have me excused.' And another said, 'I have married a wife, and therefore I cannot come.' So the servant came and reported these things to his master. Then the master of the house became angry and said to his servant, 'Go out quickly to the streets and the lanes of the city, and bring in the poor and crippled and blind and lame.' And the servant said, 'Sir, what you commanded has been done, and still there is room.' And the master said to the servant, 'Go out to the highways and hedges, and compel people to come in, that my house may be filled. For I tell you, none of those men who were invited shall taste my banquet.'" For now, we're just going to be focusing on the first part of the passage. Here we see a master, this man who has extended his invitation to his peers, and in turn they turned him down and made excuses not to attend the banquet. This is an illustration that many of us can relate to. A lot of us would have organized some type of events for large groups or small groups, either be birthdays, weddings, and for mothers and women, they do baby showers. So you would have experienced a lot of people that you invited that they've come up with some legitimate excuses that they won't be able to make it. And you can also tell from some people that they just don't want to turn up, and they just came up with a different excuse, At the same time, many of us are guilty of committing the same actions to our peers, and especially to our Lord Jesus Christ. And the man here represented is Jesus himself. So the people who made excuses can represent us and our circumstances. Now, the world has so much attraction and other preoccupations that that takes up our time and our commitment, and that makes us more humans, that we forget that we are sons of God. Our own ambitions tend to have taken over our devotion to God in a way. I don't know about you guys, but before the lockdown, this is what most of us have been acting, and only until we enter a much stricter lockdown that we begin to see the error of our actions. This is just in my experience anyway. I've never spent more time with God than ever before. So it made me realize what I've done before, because it's like God is using this time to really, really dig deeper into His Word, and to really nurture this relationship with Him. Sadly, I'd say, I hate to sound a bit judgy, but there are still many believers who remain asleep from this and does not see what's really happening around. From what I've taught you guys from my last video regarding sin, do you see what sort of sin that is at work in this passage? This is the sin of apathy taking over our personalities. So this gets away unnoticed. When life on earth begins to seem to feel good for us, we're not willing enough to let it go. Jesus always extends his invitation to us every day, and he's drawing us closer to him. But the problem is we are not drawing back to him. We're not responding when he's trying to draw closer to him. So while we're still alive, he does this regularly to us. He never stops knocking in our doors, the doors of our hearts, and to basically, in a way, he's saving our souls and to maintain this relationship with him. So he continues to extend his invite to be in his presence, to be in his banquet. However, when we go to the next passage, it says in Luke 14:24-33, "Now great crowds accompanied him, and he turned and said to them, 'If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it began to mock him, saying, This man began to build and was not able to finish. Or what king going out to encounter another king in war will not sit down first and deliberate whether he is able with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000? And if not, while the other is yet great way far off, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. So therefore, any one of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciples." So basically, it's like from that, the last bit of that passage, whatever you have plans, you should just let it go because it's pointless. You may not be able to even accomplish them. Even though you've managed to get to that point when you have accomplished something, it's not even gonna get finished at some point. You know, it's gonna keep going and going until you seek to get into a much higher position or much higher aspirations, things like that. You know, this is one of the reasons why he also made statements about coming to him and does not hate his father, mother, and brother, sister, even his own life, cannot be his disciple. So the passage titles, like you know, when you read the chapter, there are different titles that divides the passage, and the topic are just there for subject matter, but they are still in conjunction to his teaching about people making excuses because they love their lives more than they would love Jesus. Our relationships shouldn't supersede our relationship with Jesus. He even goes on to say, "He who loves them more than me is not worthy of me." You choose to follow Christ, so you should be ready to let go of everything you own and love. We have to understand. I know this is the hardest verse to even try to comprehend, and we can try to justify what we have would still matter. So we just gotta understand that no matter what, letting go of the very things we value other than Jesus will show what it means to be his disciple. Of course, it doesn't mean you literally hate your family and friends. I'm not saying that at all, but you need to understand that you do not let your relationships with them supersede your relationship with Jesus, or not even their views get in the way of your relationship with Jesus. Your love for him and your obedience to him is what's going to bring about your true calling as a disciple and will bring about your true rewards in heaven. His views should trump over the views of those around you. Even up to this point, I'm not saying that I'm perfect on what I'm doing. I'm still learning. You know, I still falter to my to my own desires, and to really ignore what God is saying to me. I'm still learning, you're still learning in a way. So if you're watching this, that it's live, that I am still learning to this point what it means to be a disciple. But I thought like we should have this sort of like talk about this, just to help each other out. So we should like when those people around you, including your family, choose to love things other than God, there will be times that you will be drawn to love what they love as well, other than loving God. There's even a threat of being hated by them. That's another thing. So growing up with families, we have become so close to them, and growing with friends as well. This is a challenge for many of us, as our attachments to them become stronger on each moment of growth with them. Now when we go to the next verse, Matthew 10:34 to 39, he said here, "Do not think that I came to bring peace on earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a man's enemies will be those of his own household." Wow. He who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And he who loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And he who does not take his cross and follow after me is not worthy of me. He who finds his life will lose it, and he who loses his life for my sake will find it. And that's a very strong statement from Jesus. Now, why did Jesus say, "I did not come to bring peace, but a sword"? Now, Jesus is making a clear distinction here between human peace and spiritual peace. Remember, it says in John 14:27, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid." Okay? So he offers a different kind of peace. It is a peace that the world will be unable to accept. And this goes against the kind of peace that the world is offering. So this is a clash of two pieces. It's a bit of a pun, a place in there. So you can just imagine like a magnet, and if you're trying to attract the opposite sides, they repel. So it's a clash of two worlds. When we receive Christ into our lives, we in turn have received that peace that he offers. It is a kind of peace that removes, according to this, it removes the fear in our lives, giving us boldness into bringing out the testimony of Christ into the world. So giving us the boldness to testify about Jesus. He is making a very strong statement here that is making us uncomfortable in a way. Our humanity is one of the biggest obstacles and the biggest hurdle that we need to try and jump over to attain the title of being the disciple of Christ. Letting go of worldly passions and ambitions is painful for us, especially for those who have accomplished so much. The thing is, we will never be happy here. We will continue to try to have ambitions to get better in life, and this becomes a distraction in a way. And the strongest sin also that is trying to expose here is the sin of saving your life, which he mentioned in verse 39. He who finds his life will lose it, and he who loses his life for my sake will find it. So he's saying here, don't try to save your life, don't try to find it. Because you understand, we understand that no one wants to die, and no one wants to lose their loved ones. The people around us, including believers, can draw us away from God, and we shouldn't try to underestimate the whole situation. If you have non-believing friends and relatives, they can be your hurdle on your relationship with Jesus and to maintain the title as his disciple. And just because you have believing friends, it doesn't mean they will always draw you closer to God, and not all of them act like that. At the same time, we should put also into consideration that we may have been guilty of this in a way. We may also have drawn a lot of believers away from God, and didn't even know it, and we basically become the willing subjects of the enemy to draw them away from God. So I'm trying to say here, you are meant to make a spiritual difference to the people around you, and we shouldn't be we should be set apart, holy, just as Jesus is holy. And with this kind of peace, it should actually draw them even closer to God. This peace should be able to bring about God's testimony and Jesus' testimony into their lives. If we look at Luke 14, 34 to 35, it says here, "Salt is good, but if the salt has lost its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It is neither fit for the land nor for the dunghill, but men throw it out. He who has ears to hear, let him hear." So basically, we are called to be the salt for this world. What's the purpose of the salt? This is to bring in the flavor in food, right? And to make the difference for the food. So at the same time, you can use salt to be able to preserve certain foods as well. If we are preoccupied by our own goals, ambitions, families, our lives, then our spiritual saltiness will eventually lose its flavor, and then we become useless in His kingdom. What happens when something becomes useless? They will be disposed of. If you look at John 15 verse 1, he says here, "I am the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me and I in him bears much fruit, for without me you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he is cast out as a branch and is withered, and they gather them and throw them into the fire, and they are burned." That's pretty tough. This is correlating to that with being the salt. So Jesus is very much straightforward here. So if we are not abiding in Him and not bearing fruit, we become useless and would be thrown into the fire and are burnt. We don't want to end up like those who are, backslidden. It will eventually lead to that. You become useless for His kingdom. Now, the thing is, the kingdom of the enemy is very good and it's very attractive. When we cave in to our desires, we end up not abiding in Him and abandoning the calling as a disciple, that we end up detaching ourselves from Him, detaching ourselves from the true vine and His teachings. Some even sell their souls for their own desires, for their own worldly desires, and not even notice it. So can you see what sin is doing? If you look at Matthew 18 to 26, what good will it be for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? The sin of apathy can do this, and we need to recognize this sin daily. We cannot let apathy bring us away from Christ, because apathy can lead to many sins. It can. This sin is much harder to detect, especially amongst the Australians. We have this saying in Australia, "She be right." It's an apathetic tone that we use to just let it go and things like that. But I digress. This sin is strong enough to draw us away from Christ, and we will eventually bring us to loving ourselves and our families more than Christ. And therefore, Jesus has to make a point when it comes to becoming His disciple. So we should pray that the Lord will help you remain rooted in His Word, that you remain attached into the true vine, so you don't end up letting go of God for the sake of loving everything else and everyone else more than Him. And again, I'm not saying that you should start hating on your families and friends, but you are in a position to show your love to them, the kind of love that Jesus wanted to present to them, and to introduce that same peace you received from Jesus into them. And here's another one. It says in Matthew 7 verse 13 to 14, enter by the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction, and there are many who go in by it, because narrow is the gate and difficult is the way which leads to life, and there are few who find it. Sadly, not many people, not many believers will come into this realization, and not many will live out the fullness of a disciple's life. And just like what this passage says, not many will find this life that Jesus is presenting to us. Not many, because it's very narrow and it will be difficult to even go through it. And many believers would only choose to go, I'd say, would only choose to go on Sundays and listen to the sermons and say things about the message like, oh, that's a great preaching, I'm so blessed by the message. Oh, the worship is great. Oh, that preacher was able to present the message wonderfully, And then you forget what you've learned and just go on about your business. You go on your hangouts and things like that. So we've basically created ourselves a subtle destruction of what stays on Sundays or on Saturdays, if you observe Shabbat, stays on that day and never really apply what you've learned for the rest of the week. We've become more contempt into our own ambitions and your hangouts and our other priorities that we forget that our number one priority in our lives is really spending more time with Jesus himself. Life as a disciple of Christ is not going to be easy and comfortable, because remember, narrow is the gate and difficult is the way which leads to life, and there are very few who find it. So will you be that person who is able to go through the narrow gate? Will you be able to find this difficult path that leads to life? The command from Jesus is in Matthew 22 verse 37, and he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And the second is like this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So love God first and then those around you. He had to make another strong statement again by saying, this is the great and first commandment. So do you see that? We really need to always put a note into this one, that it's a great and first commandment. This is the order of our title as a disciple of Jesus. It is essential for us so we can hear more from him and to really understand his great and awesome plan for us. The case of what's happening around us now globally is a test of who or what we do love the most. He's already making it evident and expose those who really loves this world and who really loves him. So he's clearly making a distinction now. And are we willing to lose our lives for the sake of our love for Christ, and or save our lives for the sake of those of people around us, or even the ambitions and goals that we have? Don't get me wrong, I'm not telling you to be reckless or careless. There's nothing wrong with having ambitions in life, but when it comes to our spiritual lives, our relationship with Christ is what matters most. Everything else is secondary. Even sometimes our ministries that we're involved in, even at times the ministries that we're involved in even becomes a priority, and Jesus becomes a second, But to really show our love to Jesus, we ought to follow on his command to us. Okay, well, time will come when he asks of you to let them go. It will come, and it's going to be painful for us to hear, because the people around you have impacted you and loved you, and you love them back, and you've worked hard to be where you are now, and suddenly Jesus will require you to let them go and follow him. So imagine that. Then at the end of the day, like when you meet God face to face, he will ask you the question of, what have you done for my son Jesus? How much have you done for my kingdom? Things like that. So this is a challenge for us. And I believe we're at the point now. So pray that we maintain that peace that Jesus gave us, not as the world gives. What the world gives is contrary to what Jesus is giving to us. And what He is giving will lead us to eternal and wonderful peace. So by closing, I pray that you continue to fight the good fight and to let the Holy Spirit lead you into the knowledge of Christ. Amen.